I've had a good time. About this gent Carson, I tell you again that I never killed him. But that don't matter. You've got me squeezed for it, and I might as well die for a job that I didn't do as for one that I did. My pipe is filled to the lip, and I'm ready to smoke it, if you hold a match. That's all I have to say. I never played no favorites, and I never asked for no partners but one. And he's turned straight, the fool. As for the rest of you, you can all go to the devil. I've lived my life. I've liked the taste of it. That's all I have to say. Turn me off, and be damned to you. That was the death speech that he would make. He had framed and reframed it, and he could not find a word that he wanted to change. It was the truth from first to last, because really he had not killed Carson. All of the rest was true, also, particularly that he had no partner except one. Ah, if that one had stayed with him, he never would have come to grief. If the magic hands of that helper had been working beside him, he could have laughed at all the power of the law, he was sure. Even now he had aimed through the pass and toward the house of that partner, as a drowning man aims for the bit of floating wreckage. As he went on, he pondered in his mind the reception he would get. To that old partner, he had not been entirely true. He had cheated his friend. When the years have passed, however, we're likely to forget the bitter and remember the sweet. And Larry Burns fervently prayed that it might be so now. He eased himself a little forward in the saddle. The ache of his legs above the knees, along the inner muscles of the thighs, was a thing not to be uttered in words. It could only be expressed by groans and curses. The back of his neck ached as though someone had been beating it with a club. He thought that aching might come from the nodding of his head. A dozen times in the last 12 hours he had found himself nodding. Sometimes he felt that his head would jerk off, or that the stroke of his chin would fracture a rib. His chin was bruised with the pounding. It was sore to the touch. So he eased himself forward in the saddle. It was not really ease that he found. It was only a change of pain. At that change he grinned and felt with his smile no familiar furrowing of his cheeks. They had been sleek, fat cheeks when he had left the jail, but they were drawn hard now. He could guess that he had lost, say, 20 pounds during these 2 days of punishment. If he had been that much lighter from the start, who could say that the posse ever would have managed to hang to his heels so closely? Aye, if only he had kept himself in training in the jail. In spite of the restricted space, he could have done setting-up exercises. He could have walked a pace and made a turn and walked again. He could have done this for about an hour a day, and so kept from his body the filthy sleek of prison fat. So thought Larry Burns now, and thrust out his big, square jaw and glared ahead of him, but dared not look behind again. For he could hear the noise of the dogs breaking out from the mouth of the pass, and he knew by the way that the sound flowed down the slope behind him that the riders were gaining. He gave his own horse the spur, but there was little response. The mustang began to trot, but the trot was a stagger. The weight of his rider had killed him. Burns cursed that weight. Many a time he had boasted of his inches. Many a time he had been able to stand straight and look down on others. He had had his own way through a crowd. There were very few who had cared to face him. So he had loved the bigness of his body and had been proud of it, but now he cursed it, because it was just that which was anchoring him, while the posse swept up from behind. He listened to the sound, and he tried to calculate the distance they were behind, and the rate at which they would overtake him. It might be in half an hour. After all, their horses were tired too. It was not for nothing that he had ridden himself to the dropping point and worn out his third horse in 2 days. They would talk about this, the newspapers. They would make a great thing, not of him for the heroism of his fight, but of the marshal for the terrible resolution of his pursuit. That's what they would find to praise, the marshal. Once more the soul of the fugitive rose in a mighty dread and a mighty hatred for that pale, thin face, the color of dust. He felt that he would be willing to die, that he would gladly die, if only he could remove the honor of his death from the head of the marshal. If only he could manage to thwart that famous manhunter, it would fill his cup. Now, as the trail wound and lifted to the wave of a green hill, he saw before him his chance. It was a small house, painted white, with a red roof, and it was not large, not imposing. Behind it was a little barn that was not there when he last saw the layout, and behind the barn there was a tangle of corral fencing. That tangle had grown, too. The place was enlarging, prospering. One did not enlarge corrals without a reason. He thought of that prosperity as he saw the white of the house winking through the silver shimmer of the poplar trees that surrounded it. Prosperity, to Larry Burns, always had meant the wealth that succeeds a good haul, but it meant something else in this case. It meant that the owner of that ranch had worked his feet into the soil, just like a tree, and that he was drawing nutriment and strength out of the ground. Yeah, he was right, thought Larry Burns. We all give him the laugh, but he was right. That's the natural way. That's the right way. His jaw fell. He gaped vaguely at the house and at his own thought. He was too weary to stick for long to his own idea. His brain ached almost as much as his body ached. But somewhere in the back of his mind he registered that thought. He had been wrong. One could raise money fast enough at the point of a gun, but money was not happiness. Happiness grew only on cultivated soil, with hard work, like wheat. He nodded at the thought and then shook his head over it. He wished vaguely that he could have reached the conclusion when he had been a boy. But when he was a boy, he had not been hunted for his life. Then, too, he had not had the great exemplar of that house on the hillside, the twinkling of the poplar trees, the fat-sided barn, and the bright curve of the creek that ran down the valley bottom. Ah, what a sleek valley it was! The fat of it shone green and smiling upon the troubled mind of the outlaw. He almost felt, in honesty, that if he had looked with a clear eye at that spot in the old days, and if he could have made it his, he would have given up the wrong path. He pressed on. The Mustang was very tired now, but it seemed to guess that the white house and the poplars were the final goal, so it freshened its pace and even lifted its lumpish head a little. It had seemed a miracle to the rider that the Mustang could keep up its head at all on such a long, scrawny neck during the interminable and nodding leagues of their journey. So they pressed on toward the house among the poplars until the trail turned into a road, and from the road Larry Burns could see the house in more intimate detail. He drew up his Mustang at once with a grunt of dismay. Chapter 2. The Geraldi Fingers. It was a lonely part of the world. Neighbors were few and far between. Larry Burns had counted upon being able to see his friend alone, but he was wrong, it appeared, for yonder were a dozen horses hitched to the rack near the house, and at a second hitching rack there were buggies also, as well as the tough buckboard that could be driven almost anywhere that a horse can walk. There was some sort of a celebration going on in that house. What could it be? Men did not gather like this except for a birth, a wedding, or a death. "Jimmy's gone and died on me," said Larry Burns. He had almost forgotten his own terrible weariness, his more terrible fear, in the thought that his friend might have died. For that was like imagining the life gone out of a thunderbolt. What a brilliant stroke was gone